Welcome, listener, to the Right Here, Right Queer podcast. This is Sarah Wallace, and you are about to hear the first few letters from Letters to Half Moon Street by Sarah Wallace and narrated by Gregory Maupin. Please enjoy.
From Geraldine Hartford, Shelfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress. To Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 28 August, 1815.
Dear Gavin, Mamma has written me about a scheme to send you to London. I thought having a letter waiting for you when you arrive might be a pleasant surprise. You will likely be a grump about the whole thing, for you do not enjoy having your life upset. But surely you will not want to be at home when John and Veronica take over the house. You and John have never gotten along in the best of circumstances. Living together while his wife goes through her confinement will only exacerbate things. Goodness knows what sort of chaos will ensue when her baby is actually born. Mamma is quite right to send you away. You know I do not say that lightly. Before you ask, no, I will not come and help you settle in London. I am having a capital time with our cousins, and have no interest in leaving. I believe living alone in town will do you some good. You want a little independence, my dear brother. Please do not spend all of your time in the library, and do try to enjoy yourself. Affectionately, Gerry.
From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London. To Geraldine Hartford, Shelfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 1 September 1815. Gerry, London is already a right bore. If you were a kind sister like you ought to be, you would not make me suffer alone. Terribly unsporting of you. Mother was in a fine state before I left. She had the servants going through all the usual household spells, making sure every part of the house was spotless. I don't see why she bothers. Veronica is happiest when she feels superior, so a less than perfect house will make her more eager than ever to be mistress of it some day. When Mother first suggested this scheme, I thought she was sending me to London only to get me out of the house temporarily. But it seems she intends for me to stay until after the baby is born. She even said I might as well stay for 6 months or more. She has insisted I will be in the way. It is absurd for her to be in such a state. Veronica is unlikely to actually take Mother's advice on anything, and will only frustrate everybody. Oh, and Father sat me down and went over all of the business he wants me to take care of while I am in London. I suppose I should be grateful he did not foist these responsibilities upon me sooner. And I dare say I'm glad I'm not the firstborn. Having that much responsibility would be even worse, even with the benefit of inheritance. At any rate, Father said the real reason I am staying here is to see to it that the townhouse is prepared for the season, and he gave me a list of things he wants taken care of. He also said if I do well enough at all of this, I might be able to continue with it as an actual career, acting as steward on John's behalf. I shudder to imagine it. I really must find an occupation for myself, and soon. I did notice Father did not alter the timeline Mother put forth, so I suspect this list of responsibilities is merely to keep me busy. What a great bother it all is. Our townhouse in London was outrageously warm when I arrived. I'm glad I wasn't sent here at the height of the summer. As it was, I had to dash around the house to help the servants open the windows. Then I had to set up at least a dozen cooling spells. Cook already needs more mint for the purpose. I still have that tendency to overload my spells with too much magical power, so the cooling spells ought to have made the place frigid. And yet it is still too warm. It would be far better if you were here to help me. I confess I am thoroughly intimidated by the city. Father gave me directions to the club we're members of. I had initially planned to walk there. I'm accustomed to walking or riding everywhere back at home, but I am far too nervous about getting lost. I took a hackney the first time I went to Nesbitt's club, and I was immediately confused by all the turns and the traffic. I am sure you will scold me, but I cannot countenance going anywhere other than the club at this juncture. Did you go to Nesbitt's when you were in town? I own I did not know what to expect. I liked the quiet atmosphere, but I was alarmed by the number of people inside. I went straight to the dining room and found a little table in the corner. I sat next to a lovely stained glass window, which was pleasant, and no one approached me, which was a relief. It was unsettling, though, to sit in a dining room amongst strangers, and to be completely alone. Now I am alone in London, and it may be months before I can leave. Until the season begins in earnest, there is precious little to do. Not that I would relish being here when the season is at its peak, for you know I do not enjoy suffering through so much society. Even with father's list of responsibilities, I am not exactly busy. I dare say I'm grateful for that, but I feel sure I shall forget something. Practically all I have to occupy my time is to dine at Nesbitt's club, which is hardly diverting. At home I could hide in books all day, but the library in our London house is nothing to the library at home. It would serve our parents right if I gambled away my funds out of sheer boredom. Give my regards to our cousins. Affectionately, Gavin. From Geraldine Hartford, Schofield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 4 September 1815.
Dear Gavin, you know, Mamma, once she has a scheme in her head, she must have her way. Do you remember when our cousin said Tutting-on-Cress was simply filled with eligible bachelors? Now that I am here, I am convinced Rose was fibbing. There are precious few single men around. Besides, I'm fairly sure Rose fancies another woman in the village, so I have no idea why she was even considering gentlemen suitors. From what Aunt Lily has said, there was some sort of to-do in the spring, something about a dashing bachelor. Rose has been tight-lipped on the details, but I suppose it's possible for her to be of the feminine persuasion and still have her head turned by a particularly handsome man. If I learn more, I shall tell you. In any case, attempting to win a husband is an exhausting experience, so I'm not opposed to simply enjoying my time here rather than continuing the search. I have not admitted any of this to Mamma yet. I think she will be disappointed about the lack of prospective suitors, but I doubt she will mind me staying here indefinitely. She trusts me to behave well around John, even less than she trusts you. You will simply grumble and lock yourself up in the library. But suffering under John's company, I might actually put a curse on him, brother or no. You cannot convince me there is nothing for you to do. Is there no one you can talk to at our club? You do know Nesbitt's caters to the intellectual set, don't you? I'm sure you could find someone there who shares an interest in poetry or magic or something. Of course, you would have to actually talk to them to discover this. I certainly hope you do not intend to spend your entire time in London without talking to anybody. I agree with you on the subject of the library in the townhouse. Try Hatchard's bookshop. They kept me quite afloat while I was in London. I don't believe you would be such a pinhead as to gamble away your money, but I think it might do you some good to be reckless, so I will not talk you out of it. I warn you, however, that I shall not lend you my money. The shops in Tutting-on-Cress are excellent, despite it being a small town, and there are plenty of things I wish to buy. Affectionately, Gerry.
From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Geraldine Hartford, Schofield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 7 September 1815. Gerry, you may not believe it, but I have already completed Father's list. Well, some of the items must be repeated throughout my stay, but I have managed to take care of everything else. I suppose Father may be right about this being a suitable career for me. I mean to say, I did not find anything he had me do at all difficult. I might even consider it as a viable option, but I truly cannot countenance having to answer to John for the rest of my life. I have a suspicion father knows this and is looking to oust me from my current state of indecision. I am sure I would not mind finding a career for myself, but I haven't the faintest idea of what I should do. I am not clever enough for law, nor to be a professor. I'm sure I haven't the stomach to be a doctor, nor the proper gravity to be a vicar. And I know what you shall say. I have more than enough gravity. You take my meaning. I have not the soul of a vicar. Besides, vicars have to talk a great deal to people quite regularly, and I'm sure I should hate that. Come to think of it, law poses the same problem. So does the medical profession. And teaching. Blast it. I wish I could be like you and Seb and simply look for a spouse. But the very notion of such a task fills me with utter dread. I want to retch just thinking about it. My evenings at the club have been very strange lately. The manager keeps asking me if I would like to be introduced to people. Did she ever do that to you? I told her I knew no one in London, and then she said apparently some people would like to know me. This was a terrifying prospect, so I begged her to discourage them as politely as she could. She gave me an odd look, but did as I asked. I have taken to practically inhaling my food in order to prevent this from happening again. I would take my meals at home, but it is far too hot for such a thing. If you were here, we could make a merry party of it at the club together. I'm sure you will tell me you have acquaintances in town, and you would be perfectly happy to meet new people. Even if I were forced to suffer through some amount of society, it would be far less horrifying if I had someone to do it all with me. Is there no chance I can persuade you to come stay in London? Affectionately, Gavin. From Geraldine Hartford, Sheffield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 10 September 1815. Dear Gavin, I am not surprised to learn you have dispatched Papa's list so quickly. If it weren't for John, I'd say the career would suit you. But you would do much better to find something else. I know you said the idea of entering into the marriage mart fills you with dread, but I'd rather think you would do well at keeping house for someone. Far better than I will be, that's certain. You ought to stay for the season when Mamma and I return to London. Mamma would be delighted as anything to find you a good match, and it was much easier meeting people with her around. I still don't see how you managed to avoid being pushed into marriage sooner. I suppose our parents sending you to London now may be an indication that your time is coming. The manager at Nesbitt's never approached me with such a message. Why on earth did you turn her down? I'm dying with curiosity as to who wanted to meet you. Whoever it was must have been very keen to go to the manager for an introduction. I hope your next letter tells me you went back and said you'd changed your mind. I have already told you I have no interest in returning to London right now. Besides, we wouldn't have a chaperone. I suppose you are permitted to manage without one because you are there on business. Perhaps it is because you are so very careful all the time. Mamma would have hysterics if she learned you and I were staying in the townhouse together with no one to keep an eye on us. I think you are correct that Papa may be giving you such responsibility in order to persuade you to get cracking. I'm sure he would be pleased if you took the opportunity to meet more people, even without a chaperone. Making new friends at the club cannot be objectionable. I seem to remember advising you to be reckless in my last letter. I stand by this advice, if for no other reason than because I know perfectly well you will not heed it. You are, I think, too careful sometimes. What better time to challenge yourself than when you're in London? Take heart, and do let the manager introduce you to people. Affectionately, Gerry. From John Hartford, Linwood House, Shirton, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 11 September 1815. Gav, I was shocked to discover you were not in residence when Veronica and I arrived. Our father informs me that he sent you to London to look after the townhouse until the season begins. He seems to think family steward will be a suitable occupation for you. Quite frankly, I can think of nothing less suitable, although father has directed me to keep such opinions to myself until you have had a chance to prove yourself. Our mother says she encouraged you to stay in London for the whole time we're here. She claims there would be too many people at home. This is complete nonsense, of course. Geraldine is staying with our cousins, and Sebastian is at Oxford. There is plenty of space. Besides, we will likely take up residence on the 3rd floor, particularly when the infant arrives, so there will always be a number of people in residence, unless you intend to move out permanently, and that will be difficult until you reach your majority. Father believes it will be good for you to live on your own for a while. However, Gav, I must admit to some concern about you being alone for so long. You are unaccustomed to it. We both know you have no talent for making decisions. If you do not desire to stay in London alone, and I will not be surprised if you don't, I will talk our parents into sending for you. When you return, I would like to have a discussion with you. I feel you have dithered long enough on your plans for the future. It appears that neither of our parents has the least idea what will actually suit you. As the eldest, it is clearly incumbent to me. John. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, 14 September 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, please find enclosed what I owe you from last night's game of 21. I know you will attempt to refuse it again, but as I said last night, I am a gentleman, sir, and always honour my debts. Gavin Hartford. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 14 September 1815. Mr. Hartford, do you always receive gifts in such a manner? As I told you last night, it was not alone. When such a reserved young man allows himself the rare liberty to be the worse, or better, for wine, I hate to see him regret it. I had hoped removing any reasons for regret would encourage you to indulge more often. It would do you some good, in my opinion. Besides, few people are as charming when they lose their inhibitions as you are. Regards, Charles Kentworthy. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, 14 September 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, whatever you may think, I neither need nor want your charity. I have the funds. I was, simply, without them last night. Nor do I want your opinion, particularly on what may or may not be good for me. I am perfectly capable of determining such things myself. Nor was I in my cups, and I resent the implication. G. Hartford. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 15 September 1815. Mr. Hartford, I cannot imagine what I have done to offend, my dear, but please accept this copy of Coleridge as a peace offering. I seem to remember you saying your library was not as well stocked as you would like, and how you had been searching for this volume. Considering your claim to have been thoroughly sober, you will undoubtedly remember the conversation. Regards, Charles Kentworthy. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Geraldine Hartford, Shelfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 15 September 1815. Gerry, you will never advise me to be reckless again. With the townhouse so frightfully warm, I have continued to dine at Nesbitt's Club. They keep enough spellcasters on staff to maintain cooling spells throughout the building, and it is far more comfortable than what I can manage at home. However, as I detailed in my last letter, I've only been staying for short spurts before retreating back to the townhouse. I did not ask the manager for introductions, but I ended up meeting some of the other members despite myself. You see, I went the other night in a fit of pique and got very drunk indeed. I am quite ashamed to admit it. It is very unlike me to get soused, as you well know. I can't say I recommend it, or plan to try it again. Some of the members invited me to join them in a game of 21, and I relaxed enough to do so, which is also unlike me. I was doing remarkably well, so naturally I kept playing. I then started to lose, as one sometimes does with card games. I wound up owing far more than what I had with me. Gerry, I have never had a gaming debt in my life. I don't understand what others see in it. I was feeling pretty low about the whole thing when one of the other players came to my rescue. His name was Mr. Kentworthy, and he paid my entire debt, which, frankly, made me feel even worse. It is one thing to be in debt to a club. It is another matter entirely for a complete stranger to pay you out. I tried to tell him not to. In fact, I think I got a little tetchy in my insistence, but the blasted man did not pay any heed to my arguments. I must have been drunker than I realized, because all I remember is how well he tied his cravat and how perfectly his coat fit him. Once I had properly sobered up, I sent him what I owed him. He replied by sending me a book I've been wanting. This is perfectly vexing, as I do not recall having mentioned this book to him, but I can hardly admit that. It seems improper to accept it, but I dearly want to. What's more, I was so embarrassed by the incident, I had intended to pay off my debt with him and end whatever association I'd made. And now we're conversing more than we had before. Far from ending my association with him, I seem to have started one. It is galling to have to ask for your advice, but I am positively flummoxed, and you are the only person who will understand. Affectionately, Gavin. P.S. Much as it pains me to add this, I should confess that the whole incident happened because John wrote to me. Even the way he writes is irritating. He talks to me as if I am considerably younger than he is, when I am in fact scarcely 2 years his junior. Just because he gained his majority sooner than we will does not make him magically more mature. He tried to persuade me to come home, and said I am ill-suited to being alone in London. The thought of him knowing me better than I know myself put me in that fit of pique I mentioned at the beginning of my letter. John manages to vex me even from a distance. Odd how I was just complaining about wishing to go home, and now I have absolutely no desire to do so. Did you realize John and Veronica intend to take over the 3rd floor of the house? I'm sure I didn't. I know he is entitled, and it really shouldn't surprise me, but dash it all, I hoped marriage would keep him out of the family seat. I had no idea it would ensconce him more firmly into it. Our poor parents. From Geraldine Hartford, Cholfield Hall, Totting-on-Cress, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 18 September 1815. Dear Gavin, I did not know John and Veronica intended to take over the 3rd floor, but I admit I am not surprised. John is far too thrifty to countenance leasing or buying another home out of consideration for our parents. You find it odd that a letter from John would make returning home less appealing, but I certainly do not need a letter from him to confirm this. I imagine they would have to travel about eventually to visit other people. I shall happily wait until they do so before returning home again, if I can manage such a thing. I have no desire whatsoever to share the same roof as Veronica. Don't be a goose. Of course you should accept the book. And don't tell me you were rescued by Mr. Charles Kentworthy. I only know him by reputation. He is quite the rake, from what I understand. He's supposed to be very fashionable and possibly dangerous.
But then that may just be an exaggeration. Dashing people are often considered dangerous by their very nature. Everyone says he's one of the most eligible bachelors in London. I met many people who had tried to capture his attention, but I hear he is determined to stay single. Is it true he enjoys the company of both men and women? And yes, I'm being indelicate, and don't you dare lecture me for it. I've never known someone to be of multiple persuasions, but I cannot determine if this is because we are from a small community or if it is truly rare. It is not the done thing, you know, to go about asking people of their persuasions, so I had to guess most of the time when I was in London. Is he really on friendly terms with Lord Byron and the Prince Regent? And is it true about those parties? I wish to know everything. Affectionately, Gerry. P.S. Please send me some fashion plates. The ones here are quite old, and that will not do.
From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, 20 September 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, I cannot think how you could have remembered my mentioning that book, but I cannot pretend I am not gratified that you did. I am sure I should reject such a gift, but I confess I am too pleased by it to do so. I feel I must also apologize for being churlish. I am not accustomed to being so unguarded. It was decent of you to spot me the money, but I wish you hadn't needed to. G. Hartford. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 20 September 1815. Mr. Hartford, keep the book, my dear, I insist. I remembered your mentioning it because I was surprised such a grave person would be interested in poetry. I hope you will not mind if I confess I was pleased to have an opportunity to finally meet you. I've seen you dining at the club for the past fortnight, and I have never in my life observed a quieter and more reclusive gentleman than yourself. My curiosity was piqued even further when I witnessed you indulging in what I can only presume to be a highly uncharacteristic mood. In short, you intrigue me, darling, if you will forgive me for saying so. I would never describe you as churlish, but I will accept your apology if you agree to join me in my box at the opera tonight. Please do me the honour of satisfying my insatiable desire to get to know you better. Lady and Lord Partridge will be there as well, lest you fear for your reputation. Sincerely, Charles Kentworthy. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Geraldine Hartford, Shelfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 20 September 1815. Gerry, I cannot imagine why you think I should be on such good terms with Mr. Kentworthy as to know all of that, and I am certainly not going to ask him. He does seem to be a pretty decent chap, however. He even invited me to join him in his opera box. I do not deserve this kindness, as I am sure I was perfectly horrid to him. I have not decided if I will accept. I shall have to mull it over. I wish Mother had not insisted I stay in London alone like this. You know as well as I do I am no great shakes at making decisions by myself. I need you here to tell me what to do. It is quite selfish of you to not be around when needed. Affectionately, Gavin. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, 20 September 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, you are too kind, sir, and I regret to admit far too generous with me. I dare say you will be quite underwhelmed upon further acquaintance. As alarming as I find it to pique the interest of any stranger, and as much as I fear I do not deserve such friendliness, I would hate to be boorish by rejecting your generous invitation. I shall be happy to join you. G. Hartford. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 20 September 1815. Mr. Hartford, my word, darling, do you always describe yourself in such an unkind manner? I can assure you I have no anticipation of being disappointed upon knowing you. I am delighted that you should accept my invitation. I will come by your residence at 7 to collect you, and we can travel to the theatre together. We shall dine with the partridges after. Until then, Charles Kentworthy. From Geraldine Hartford, Shelfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 23 September 1815.
Dear Gavin, the delay in learning such news is exasperating. Don't tell me you were such a clodpole as to refuse an invitation to Mr. Kentworthy's opera box. I shall go quite spare if you do. You must tell me simply everything about it. How was the opera? Did he have a good box? What did you discuss? What does he look like? Was it just the two of you in the opera box, or were there others? You have never mentioned your persuasion, but if rumours about him are to be believed, it might be prudent to make sure you are not alone with him overmuch. And pray don't compare me to John because of this advice. I trust your judgment to not do anything foolish, but London society can be very particular. I would hate for you to be punished for actually being sociable for once. Have you forgotten about my request for fashion plates? I am reminding you in case you have. Affectionately, Gerry.
From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Geraldine Hartford, Shelfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 26 September 1815. Gerry. The opera was excellent. Mr. Kentworthy has his own box, and the seats are remarkably close. I was able to get a wonderful view of the costumes, scenery, and spells. I believe I counted at least 6 spellcasters in the wings, performing all sorts of illusion spells and levitation spells, and they did it all so quickly I could barely see their work. I must say the opera does a fine job in hiring such a talented crew. The experience was even more spectacular after understanding the work that went into it. Mr. Kentworthy was kind enough to escort me to the theatre himself. He came by in his own barouche, so I did not have to walk about town or hire a hackney at all. On the way to the theatre, he asked me if I had been to the opera before. Never, I said, although I have heard opera music before. I mean, there were a number of people at home who sang, and I believe some of the songs were from operas. Did you enjoy it?
Very much. The music is breathtaking. I paused.
And, he said.
Well, I said, I must admit to some regrets that my Italian is not up to snuff. I always miss a great deal of the words that are said, that is, sung. I felt very foolish for this confession, but he simply nodded and said, "That does certainly detract from the pleasure. I would be happy to offer some translations, if it would help."
"Oh, Lord," I said, "you have no need to do that." He laughed and said, "I would be only too glad to, darling. I have seen this performance before. I assure you I would not offer if I minded." As promised, he sat beside me in the theatre to provide translations of key moments and answer any questions I had, which was jolly kind of him. He kept his arm around the back of my seat, so he could more easily lean in with the occasional translation. His leg kept pressing against mine, which I found surprisingly intimate. I'm sure I should have pulled my leg away, but I didn't quite dare. I'm glad it was so dark in the theatre, for I must have been blushing profusely the entire time. I felt nervous at first with the close proximity and the prospect of asking him questions, but I found him remarkably easy to talk to, so I gradually got more comfortable. He seemed delighted when I grew bold enough to offer my opinions. At one point I mentioned how strange it was that a character would be so certain of their interest. "No one forms attachments so quickly," I said. "I'm sure I never do." "Never?" he said. "Well, he has only just met her, and already he is singing arias about her." He did not reply, but he seemed to think it funny I should make such a remark. He often looked at me with an expression of amusement. Frankly, I do not understand it. We went to the Royal Saloon for dinner afterwards. I am not accustomed to keeping such late hours, and I hope you will not think me stupid for saying so, it did make me feel oddly grown up. I have not really done anything in London since I arrived, besides dining at the club. It was an odd experience to be out and about with fashionable people at a fashionable time. No one would mistake me for fashionable, least of all you. so I dare say you will be surprised by it. I'm not sure I believe your scandalous description of Mr. Kentworthy, now that I have his acquaintance. You would think from his colourful reputation he would flirt with every person he met, but he was proper the entire time. He didn't even flirt with Lady Partridge, and I believe she is supposed to be very beautiful. Other than some small talk with people who approached us, his attention was entirely directed at our party. Why, he barely even noticed other people, for he remained focused on his conversation with me most of the evening. I dare say all the talk about him is just stuff. The only detail that supports this reputation is his propensity to address others, including me, with terms of endearment. He called me everything from my friend to darling and dear. It was a little shocking and terribly modern, but many people we met received something similar, and they took this eccentricity as a matter of course. So I suppose I ought not to be so shocked by it. Are we dreadfully sheltered, Gerry? We discussed all sorts of things at dinner. He was eager to hear my opinions of Coleridge, the book he gave me. He wanted to know my favourite poems and who my favourite poets were and why. He asked about my family. I spoke of you, and about how you were at Tutting-on-Cress now that the season is over. I talked about Seb and all those ridiculous pranks of his. I told him about John, and how I was sent away because he and Veronica had come to stay at home. I explained about all of the work Father was having me do. I talked about home an embarrassing amount, I'm afraid. I described practically everything about it to him. I dare say I am a little homesick. Can you believe it? After all my complaining about being at home all the time, and now I should wish myself back. Anyway, he listened to me prattle on, which was dashed civil of him. He asked a great many questions. Every time I attempted to curb my own sudden talkativeness, he would prod me to keep going. He would say, "What else? Tell me more." And he seemed to always know when I was trying to hold myself back. I don't know if I've ever had anyone give me such focused attention for an entire evening. It was highly flattering, although it did make me disconcerted. I am unaccustomed to speaking so much to someone I barely know. In fact, I don't know if I've ever talked so much to anyone, and I have to admit I enjoyed talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I have to say. Oh, and in answer to your previous query, Lady and Lord Partridge joined us in the box, so it was all perfectly respectable. They joined us for dinner, too, but they were barely at the table all night. They both kept leaving to talk to some acquaintance or other. So I have very little by way of description of them. They seemed quite nice, though. That is honestly all there is to say about the evening. He had business in Bath, and left this morning. We are to meet for luncheon when he returns, although I do not know when that will be. Affectionately, Gavin. From Geraldine Hartford, Shulfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 28 September 1815. Dear Gavin, I notice you have omitted 2 topics of particular interest to me, my fashion plates and what Mr. Kentworthy looks like. Also, my dear brother, you are a bit of a goose. Mr. Kentworthy does not need to flirt with everyone he meets to be a proper rake. I am particularly intrigued by your description of his tendency to use terms of affection. I've heard he spent a great deal of time on the continent. Could that account for it? I regret to say it is possible. We are very sheltered. I know I was quite surprised by how fashionable people behaved. Then, again, I found it all rather exciting. And you had best assure me you did not tell Mr. Kentworthy I was sent to Tutting-on-Cress because I had not managed to secure a husband. Imagine the most dashing man in London thinking I am unsuitable. It makes me want to scream. And if you were stupid enough to say such a thing, I insist you tell him as soon as he returns that this is not the case. If you do not, I will send you a curse. See if I don't. Affectionately, Gerry. From Sebastian Hartford, Diggory College, Oxford, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 29 September 1815.
What ho, Gav! I could not believe it when Father told me you were sent to stay in London. You get all the luck. Imagine being alone in London for months. I'm stuck here at Oxford, while you get to gallivant around town. Father is always saying I am not responsible enough for such things. Do you know what I think? I think you ought to write to Father and have him send me there to stay with you. It would be capital. We would have such a jolly time. Well, I would have a jolly time. You would likely stay all day reading in the library or something. Truly, London is probably wasted on you. It is too unfair. I played the most incredible prank last week. Stole a bust in the middle of the garden. What a laugh. The pedestal is empty, and all of the faculty are scratching their heads. Best part is, the statue is there. Only I've covered it with the most ingenious pair of spells, part invisibility and part levitation. So every time the dean swipes his hand over the pedestal, hoping to feel the stone statue, it is just air. Hilarious! Parks says it's my best yet. Which reminds me, I owe Parks quite a bit. For a gaming debt I've run up, do you think you could see your way to lending me some money? Anyway, hope London is a lark. Do try to do something interesting, if only for my sake. If I'm going to live vicariously through other people, the least they could do is have a good time. Affectionately, Seb. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 11 Royal Crescent, Bath, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 30 September 1815. Dear Mr. Hartford, I hope London is keeping you entertained. If it is not, I hope you have enough poetry to keep you suitably occupied. And if you do not, I am enclosing a volume of Byron's poetry for you. Have you read him yet? I found this copy in Bath and thought of you. I had hoped to conclude my business here within a week, but it looks as though I shall be forced to stay another week at least. I do apologize, my friend, for we shall have to delay our luncheon. Charles Kentworthy. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 11 Royal Crescent, Bath, 2 October 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, you are far too generous with me, sir. I am sure I should not accept your gift. But I admit I will likely keep it anyway and hang the propriety. You have perfect timing, actually, as I have just finished reading every book of poetry our small library has to offer. I have resorted to reading books on magical theory instead, and while the subject is certainly interesting, I do not enjoy it half so well, although I have noted a few new spells I would like to try. In any case, when I have exhausted poetry and magical theory, my next best option is to read my father's volumes on the history of the Roman Empire, or a Gothic novel that was undoubtedly purchased by my sister. After that, I can only find books on philosophy, etiquette, and sermons. I certainly have no desire to voluntarily be sermonized to, particularly when I am currently evading my brother's company. I suppose I could do worse than philosophy. At any rate, I greatly appreciate your gift. You are saving me from the Roman Empire, some sort of forest romance, etiquette, philosophy, and Fordyce. With such a glowing report of what our library has to offer, I suppose I need hardly tell you I have found London to be perfectly dull since you left it. I dare say I am used to it by now. I have half a mind to visit my sister in Bedfordshire, but I do not think I would be welcome without providing a bundle of fashion plates for her. Can you countenance it? My sister has asked me 3 times now to send her some fashion plates. I'm sure I don't know where to find such things and which ones she might like. I have to tell you, she is quite the cleverest person I know, but sometimes she is just as goose-witted as my brothers. Pray, do not hasten back on my account. Gavin Hartford. P.S. I have been directed to clarify that the reason my sister was sent to stay with our cousins was not because she was too unsuitable to find a husband in London. She has threatened on pain of curse that I make sure you know this.
I don't know why she thinks it important. Everyone who knows her adores her, as she must realize. Nobody would suggest she is actually unsuitable. Nevertheless, as I am failing in sending her fashion plates, I suppose the least I can do is ensure her name is clear with you. I honestly cannot remember what I said about her at dinner. I fear I may have talked overmuch in general. I do apologize. I believe I must owe it to the fact that I drank a great deal of port. Why is it we meet under my most inebriated moments? From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Sebastian Hartford, Degree College, Oxford, 3 October 1815. Seb. I am finding London to be rather dull, but I have to agree with Father in the matter of you coming here. You know perfectly well he will never permit you a jot of liberty if you persist in those stupid pranks of yours. Is it the influence of that Pucks fellow? I dare say you ought to find better companions. Ordinarily I would not give you a scrap of money, but as it happens I recently ran up a bit of a gaming debt myself, and someone was kind enough to assist. So I cannot in good conscience deny you the same generosity that was shown to me. However, I consider my experience to be an embarrassment and a serious lapse of good judgment, and I have resolved never to repeat it. Do take care in applying the same lessons yourself, for I will not lend you money again. Hope you are well, Gavin. P.S. How many times must I ask you to stop calling me Gav? I've always hated being called that. I know I shall never get John to listen, but I should hope you might respect this request. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 11 Royal Crescent, Bath, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 4 October 1815. Dear Mr. Hartford, you are the first person I think of now when I see poetry. I shall continue to gift you with such volumes. You cannot stop me. And if doing so leads you to thank me for saving you from Fordyce, you can rest assured I will endeavour to save you from such a dire fate as much as possible. I am curious about what spells have piqued your interest. I cannot claim any great talent for magic. My spells too often lack sufficient power. I make do with ensuring I employ talented spellcasters in my household staff, for I am no help in that department. Besides, I have little interest in theory, so I have always been a poor student of the art. My friend Bertie has quite despaired of me. I'm sure if I were left alone in your library, I would read The Romance of the Forest, or any Radcliffe novel, for that matter, 100 times before I cracked open a single book on magical theory. I think you are the only person in London who finds it dull. You can hardly fault the city for it, darling. Why not venture out more? We are not yet into the season, but there are still balls and parties to attend. If you would like to use my opera box, you are more than welcome to it. Now that I think on it, I have never seen you anywhere around town except at Nesbitt's. You are a handsome and intelligent young man. Surely you wish to meet more people and find yourself a spouse. You will certainly never accomplish such a thing if you stay at home or at the club all the time. Is it possible no one has shown you how to experience London properly? If this is so, please tell me at once, and I shall make it my personal mission to instruct you. While I would hate to advise you against visiting your sister, I must confess I will be greatly disappointed if you are not in town when I return. Please stay where you are, my friend, and I will conclude my business as quickly as may be, so I can come back and show you how a person may enjoy London. I will even help you acquire the fashion plates for your sister. Speaking of your sister, please assure her I was certain she is as beautiful and charming as her brother. London seasons are fickle things, and sometimes the most appealing of people go through a couple before finding a suitable match. You most certainly did not talk overmuch at dinner, and I take exception to your apology when I put such work into getting you to talk at all. You are, I find, determined to be mysterious. Sincerely, Charles Kentworthy. P.S. Did your sister really threaten to curse you? She sounds positively hair-raising. I'm sad I missed the opportunity to meet her. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Geraldine Hartford, Schofield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 6 October 1815. Gerry, I will send you your dashed fashion plates as soon as Mr. Kentworthy returns. He has promised to help me pick out the wretched things for you. Why can you not write to the myriad people you met in London instead? Imagine sending your brother to shop for you. I dare say you never bully Seb or John like you do me. Shocking behaviour in a sister. Mr. Kentworthy told me to tell you he was certain you were, and I quote, as beautiful and charming as her brother. He also told me plenty of people go through several seasons without finding a suitable match, so do not fret on that account. I told him you had threatened to curse me, and he said he wished he had met you, so I suppose he may be interested in courting you. However, I doubt Mother would approve of him, not with his reputation. Then again, I truly believe his reputation is mostly talk, so perhaps Mother would relent eventually, if she met him. He sent me another book of poetry. I have never had a friend who shared my love of it before, besides Seb, and he is a younger brother, so doesn't count. I feel as if I ought to give Mr. Kentworthy something in return, but I have no idea what. The man seems to have everything. Speaking of Seb, I really do worry about him. You know Father will never trust him one bit with the way he carries on. I'm sure none of us were such goosewits when we were his age. Affectionately, Gavin. From Sebastian Hartford, Diggory College, Oxford, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 8 October 1815. What ho, Gavin! Thanks ever so much for the loan. You really are a saint sometimes, do you know? Even if you won't let me come to London with you. Who paid you out? I can't imagine you playing cards, let alone playing enough to run up a debt. London must be changing you. How thrilling. Maybe you'll even start smiling sometimes. Ha! I wish you wouldn't be so sanctimonious about my friends. If it weren't for Parks, no one would talk to me. If you hadn't just loaned me money, I'd say you sound just like John. Seb. From Geraldine Hartford, Schofield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 9 October 1815.
Dear Gavin, what could I have possibly done to deserve such an addle-pated brother? You were not supposed to tell Mr. Kentworthy I wanted him to know I was appealing, you dolt. You were supposed to casually slip it into the conversation. I am not attempting to win him as a suitor, but there is a world of difference between wanting to be courted by the most infamous rake in London and having that particular rake think of you as an unappealing spinster, although I am sure you wouldn't understand such nuance. And do you mean to suggest you have determined the gentleman's persuasion? For you know I am dreadfully curious about it. You have still failed to mention what he looks like. I agree it would be good of you to give him a gift in return for his generosity. I cannot think of what would appeal. You know the man better than I. But I shall rack my brain and try to come up with something. Thank God he, at least, is unafraid of finding me some fashion plates. I confess I am even more impatient for them now. I should like to know what Mr. Kentworthy would pick out. You're right about Seb. I don't know what happened when he went to Oxford, because I don't think he was quite so foolish before. I blame his horrid friends. Affectionately, Gerry. P.S. I have enclosed a spell for you to try, however little I think you deserve it. It is one I created, and it is an extension of a standard fire spell. It prolongs the life of a candle, which seems uniquely helpful to your interests, particularly with all of those poetry books you seem to be acquiring. Do not try to cheat the spell and put a bunch of candles in the circle. It will work, but it will be a weak spell on all of the candles involved. I advise you to use just the one and have it last a longer time. The spell can be recast using the same ingredients, but it will get weaker the more it is used. As it is a new spell, please send me whatever notes and observations you may have when using it. I need hardly tell you it is perfectly safe, and has been tested by myself and the local spellmaster.
From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 11 Royal Crescent, Bath, 12 October 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, I gratefully accept your offer to help me find some fashion plates for my sister. I'm afraid I owe her such a favour now, and having your assistance will be much appreciated. She just sent me a spell she built to extend candle life. I tested it last night, and it was brilliant. I was able to burn a single candle for a good 8 hours, and it only went down an inch or so. She said it has recasting capabilities, but will get weaker the more often I use it. Is it selfish of me to wish she had sent me several packets of the same spell? I am not sure I would go so far as to describe myself as any great talent in magic, but I am proficient. I lack suitable control, really, for I often overload my spells. But I do like the theory behind it all to a degree. I can cast most spells, assuming they are of the traditional variety. As soon as I am given anything particularly complicated, calculations or measurements or that sort of thing, I am quite lost. And I am certain motion spell work is beyond me. I have never tried it, but I suspect it is far more difficult than it looks. Magic usually is. The spells I found in the books in our library are comfortably within my ability. I found a more powerful cooling spell. It has a smaller scope than the one I usually use, but it is more potent. It has been making my evenings in the library significantly more comfortable. There was also a cravat-tying spell that intrigued me. I confess I have little patience for having my cravat tied, so I look forward to speeding up the process. The cravat spell will require more practice, however. I nearly strangled myself with the first casting. Oh, and there was a spell I attempted for polishing my shoes. I thought it might be nice to take it off my valet's plate, as it were. But it was not particularly potent. Even with my tendency to overload power into it, it did little to my shoes. I take some offence to your inference that I do not know the city properly. You talk as if I do not know how to enjoy myself. The truth is I am restless no matter where I am. Every place quickly loses its appeal as I come to learn it. I find I have come to learn London, and thus it has lost its appeal. I have no taste for gaming, for obvious reasons. Like any country lad, I have a decent seat, but I dislike the idea of riding in the park. There are too many people about, and they all seem very chatty. I would much prefer to stay at home. So I have. Thus, London is dull. Your offer to use your box is generous indeed, but it would not feel right to use the box without its owner. I shall wait for your return before I visit the opera again. In answer to your question of marriage, I confess I am overwhelmed by the prospect. I have little interest in fatherhood, which complicates matters. As a second-born sibling, I stand to inherit but little, and as such am hardly a catch. I do not wish to prey upon heirs or heiresses to gain my fortune. Anyone in my family would hasten to tell you I tend to be a horrid grump. I could show you letters detailing me as such. With little fortune and a bad temper to boot, I have long given up the notion that I would be a desirable companion. I'm sure you will disagree with this assessment, as you seem uniquely determined to think well of me. Nevertheless, I am attempting to resign myself to finding a career and settling alone somewhere in the country, preferably near my sister, so I can beg her advice as much as I want, and she can scold me as much as she wants. The trouble is I cannot determine what career would suit. I'm sure this is not a problem you have found yourself facing, but I will gratefully listen to any recommendations you might offer. What a dreary topic that is. How is Bath? I have never been. I have a great aunt, however, who took the waters and swears by it. I hear they cast some sort of spell on the water to give it healing properties, and I have long wondered if it is true. Do you take the waters, Mr. Kentworthy? G. Hartford. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 11 Royal Crescent, Bath, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 15 October 1815. My dear Mr. Hartford, my business in Bath is nearly concluded. I have not had occasion to take the waters, but if you are curious, I will gladly travel back with you to see your curiosity satisfied. You may take offence to my criticism, but you are truly doing a poor job of experiencing all London has to offer. I promise to remedy that upon my return. I must warn you, however, you will have to talk to people in order to experience the city. I shall do everything I can to make sure this is not too painful for you. Prepare yourself, therefore, for rides in Hyde Park, dinner parties, balls, and races. I am determined to see you enjoy yourself. I trust you will pose a challenge, but I love a good challenge. And you shall soon learn, darling, that I always rise to the occasion. It pains me that you speak of yourself as you do. If I am, as you say, uniquely determined to think well of you, then you are in an equal rage to think ill of yourself. It will not do, dear. I fear you dwell too much in your own head. I plan to keep you as busy as possible in the coming months to curb that habit. I expect filling your calendar will also resolve your other problem, your prospects for marriage. If you are not engaged within 6 months of our friendship, I will be very much surprised. I hope you have not used that spell to its final sputterings. You never mentioned your sister was proficient in spell building. If you can spare some of the castings until I return, I am curious to see it in action. Frankly, I am curious to see all of the spells you have described to me, although I confess to some misgiving about any spell replacing a valet when it comes to cravat tying. It is an art, my friend, and one well worth the patience. By the time you receive this letter, I will be a few days behind it. Sincerely, Charles Kentworthy. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Geraldine Hartford, Chalfield Hall, Tutting-on-Cress, 18 October 1815. Gerry, thank you kindly for the spell. It is genius. I have already used it up. I was able to keep the same candle for over a week, despite using it every night for 6 or 7 hours. The spell did not truly start to weaken until the twine began fraying. I did not interfere with whatever preparations you did for the ingredients, but I believe treating the twine to keep it from fraying would extend the spell's length. Can I persuade you to send me another? Mr. Kentworthy expressed an interest in seeing it in action. Are you working on any other spells? Does Mother know you have apparently begun a career in spell mastery? God knows what she would think. I'm sure I don't mind having a sister in trade, but I dare say Mother would not approve of you doing something so decidedly beneath our station. I'm also given to understand that designing spells is rather dangerous. Should I be worried? You are my little sister, after all. Do give me some credit for brotherly concern. What is Tutting-on-Cress like? I nearly came to visit you there, but Mr. Kentworthy urged me to stay in London until he returned. I suppose it is rude for me to tell you of my rejected plans to visit, but you sometimes threaten to curse me, so I call it even. He returns to town soon. I am torn between being glad to see him again, for I have missed his conversation, and being wholly despairing of his arrival. Gerry, he has threatened to show me how to enjoy London. I am sure this sounds perfectly thrilling to you, but I know it to be a ghastly prospect. I shall have to ride in Hyde Park with him, and talk to people. I am wretched at the thought. I have a good mind to turn him down, but he has been so dashed good to me since the night he saved me at Nesbitt's. It seems churlish to reject his offer. He must see me as frightfully lonely and isolated. If he simply supplied me with poetry and the occasional conversation, I would be perfectly satisfied. I suppose a man about town like him wouldn't understand. I imagine you will not understand either. More's the pity. I am not at all sure what you wish to know about Mr. Kentworthy's looks. He is a tall man. I suppose you might call him athletic, for he has a good amount of muscle on his arms and shoulders. He cuts a dash at everything he wears, ties a good cravat. You know I am no good at guessing ages, but I would believe him to be 5 or so years my senior, in his early 30s, perhaps, or thereabouts. He has large brown angular eyes and a large mouth that often appears to be smiling or turned up at the corners as if he is trying to hide a smile. This isn't to say his mouth or his eyes are large in an unappealing sense. Our family is somewhat plagued with small eyes and small mouths, so I tend to think his features are rather pleasing. Anyway, he has very nice teeth. His skin is more tan in colour than ours, which doesn't take much. We are an absurdly pale lot of people. I don't mean to imply his skin is tan from the sun, but rather naturally a few shades darker than ours. His hair is dark, not dark like mine, for mine is still red, you know, or red in certain nights. I've often wondered how all four of us managed to have red hair. I know I'm the least gingery of us, but all the same, is that normal, do you think? In any case, Mr. Kentworthy's hair is so dark as to be black. There. Does that satisfy you? I believe I have already told you about how much I talked in his company. I have discovered his influence in this manner extends through correspondence as well. I found myself telling him all about my concerns about marriage, even going so far as to confess that I did not think anyone would find me suitable. This is something I have only told you, so it is a little shocking that I said so much to him upon so little acquaintance. I dare say I'm making a cake of myself. What's worse is he has taken it into his head to find someone for me to marry. I am sure father and mother would be delighted that I have formed an acquaintance with someone determined to help me in such a way. But I shudder to think how he will see me when all of his lovely plans fall apart because I am not as eligible as he seems to think. Hopefully my next letter will include fashion plates, and you can stop pestering me on the subject. I intended to wait until he returned to reply to you, but I did not want to delay my request for more of your spells. Affectionately, Gavin. From John Hartford, Linwood House, Sherton, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 19 October 1815. Gav. I notice you have not yet replied to my letter. I must presume the postmaster has lost it. I hope you are not ignoring me. I'm only seeking to help you. It appears you intend to stay in London, imprudent though the choice may be. I suppose you had better make the most of it. I'm sure you will receive this advice with your usual peevishness. You must understand I hoped to have this conversation in person. The fact is, you have reached a marriageable age. I admit I was not married until I was 26. You are now only 25. But it will likely take you longer to find a wife than it took me. So you had better start looking now. I fear if you wait too long, you will simply never do it. I know you will argue with me, but I am convinced bachelorhood will ill-suit you. It already ill-suits you, frankly. Much better to get the whole marriage situation over with and start to settle down. Trust me. If you do not marry, you will need to determine a suitable career. You have shown no inclination towards any occupation whatsoever. The longer you delay, the fewer options you will have. I need hardly tell you that I would certainly never turn you out, but I doubt you will want to live on my good graces alone. As I said in my previous letter, I do not think acting as steward on the family's behalf will satisfy you for long. Veronica has drawn up a list of suitable young ladies who might already be in town. She offered to also draw up a list of suitable young men, but you have given no indication that you are of any particular persuasion. So we decided to assume your persuasion is the same as mine. If we are incorrect in this assumption, do tell me, and Veronica will send a list of gentlemen instead. You will need introductions to these ladies, of course. For that you will need to socialize more. Veronica has drawn up another list of families in our acquaintance. These families will introduce you to the right sort of people. Both lists are included with this letter. Some of the families on the second list have members at our club. This will likely be the best way to start things. Remember that you are in town without a chaperone, so take care you initiate these conversations when you are in the company of others. A person's reputation is a fragile thing, and next-borns are particularly vulnerable. Veronica has also written to a few of the families asking them to invite you to dinner parties. Veronica has been very generous with her time on this matter. Remember to write her a letter thanking her for everything she is doing on your behalf. Send me a report of how you are getting on and who you have met in London. It would have been better if I were there to assist you. You were sent to London prematurely and ill-equipped. You have never had a talent for talking to people. But needs must, Gav. You can no longer hide behind your usual timidity. Our parents appear to be unbothered by your reserved nature, but I must tell you, no one likes talking to a wall. It is high time you outgrew that personality trait. This venture in London could decide your entire future. So as I said before, we will have to make the most of it. I would have far more peace of mind if I knew you to be well settled. I am sure you will gripe, for you are never satisfied with anything. You must learn to recognize when people know better than you. I will certainly answer any questions or concerns you may have, but we both know you will not send any. You have always been too stubborn to simply ask for help. John. From Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, to Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, 20 October 1815. Dear Mr. Hartford, I am pleased to inform you I am back in London. I do not wish to presume you have a fully open social calendar, but if you are free today I will gladly come collect you for our lunch. I had thought Nesbit's would suit unless you have opinions to the contrary. I have drawn up some ideas for what I am calling your London education. I look forward to sharing them with you. If there is anything particular you would like to do, I will be only too happy to add it to the curriculum. Charles Kentworthy. From Gavin Hartford, 8 Half Moon Street, London, to Charles Kentworthy, Esquire, 16 Berkeley Square, London, 20 October 1815. Mr. Kentworthy, Nesbit's will suit me perfectly well. I have been taking my meals there daily since I arrived in London and find the food quite satisfactory. What time do you usually luncheon? I should think I need hardly tell you I have no social obligations whatsoever at the moment, so I am at your disposal. I don't suppose there is any chance I shall be able to persuade you to give up this endeavour. I am living in dread of what a London education might entail. I appreciate your consideration, but I have nothing particular in mind in terms of experiencing London, except perhaps a good bookshop. My sister recommended Hatchard's, so I think I would like to go there. I confess I have not ventured out to find it myself, as I was very worried I might get lost along the way. If you are familiar with the establishment, I would be grateful for your assistance. Perhaps when we collect my sister's fashion plates, you can direct me accordingly. G. Hartford.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this excerpt from Letters to Half Moon Street by Sarah Wallace and narrated by Gregory Maupin. If you would like to hear more, you can get this audiobook on all of the audiobook retailers, as well as on library sites like Hoopla and Libby. And thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.